overnight world rankings were released in the latest program for international student assessment. And this is education data. The results for Australian school students and our system more broadly were damning. The study, which compares the performances of 15-year-olds across 79 countries every 3 years in maths, reading and science, show the results of Australian students are currently in long-term decline. One of the statistics to come out of this report that really disturbed me was the finding that Australian maths students are now 3.5 school years behind maths students in China. As I explained at the top of the show, funding over the past decade is up over 60%, yet these findings right across the board are down. Our attainment is down. Our numbers right across the board are down. Joining me now to discuss why we're in this educational hole and how we might turn it all around is New South Wales One Nation leader and long-time education reformer Mark Latham and Senior Research Fellow at the ACU, Dr. Kevin Donnelly. Kevin, I'll start with you to tell us what the problem is in numeric terms out of these PISA results they're called that came out. 79 countries looking at 15-year-olds. We are going backwards at a rate of knots.
You're dead right, and it's just one indicator. If you look at the other international tests, whether it's TIMS or PEARLS, it's the same story. Over the last, say, 15, 18 years, we've gone backwards. Our students, they're plummeting down the table. Now, that's only one measure, but there are other things that are happening as well. I mean, if you look at industry and commerce, they're always complaining about students going into the workforce when they're a bit older and not having the literacy and numeracy skills. So it's a real issue, a real problem, and unfortunately, and I wrote about this over 15 years ago, nothing's improved. And the real problem, I think, and I've written about this in The Australian, I can be here in another 3 or 4 years, and if nothing's changed, the problem will only be worse than what it is today.
If we keep doing the same thing, Mark, then we're going to get the same result, right? And it's fox and henhouse stuff here. The foxes that are putting in all of these policy changes and crowding out the curriculum and going into the latest fad in terms of educating kids are the same foxes that will be there trying to fix their henhouse. So we're not getting new blood in, we're not changing the system. And in fact, probably, I argue, we change the system too often. You know, we're upending things every couple of years on a fashion. We're not getting the basics done.
Well, that's right, Peter, and the sad thing is it's not that hard to fix schools. It's not that hard to look at the research and all the data about the things that actually work in the classroom and stick to those. And the problem in Australia is that you wouldn't believe the number of things in the classroom that are proven not to work, but teachers and principals and education authorities persist with them. And the other issue is that 10 years ago, through the Melbourne Declaration, Australian Education Minister said, well, schools won't be just about academic attainment. A big part of it will be what they call the social development of the child, which in effect is the school trying to be the parent. This is where safe schools came from, and I can guarantee you in China and Singapore and all these nations racing ahead of us in the international testing, they don't see schools as fulfilling a parenting or family role. They leave that to the family and the parents, and they concentrate heavily on academic attainment. And Australia will pay a heavy price for the fact we've been distracted into non-academic areas, and we've also persevered and allowed losing education programs proven not to work. Well, I'll give you an example in New South Wales. A couple of years ago, the Education Minister said that they were going to spend billions of dollars on hundreds of buildings and schools where they'd have open plan classrooms. This is a fad where instead of just the teacher standing at the front and teaching, there's 2 or 3 classes in there. There's noise across the area. The studies show that the students can't hear. They're distracted by the noise of the other class further along the open plan area. The teachers can't concentrate and hear on what's being said. Some students have got no idea what's going on. All the evidence around the world shows that these programs are losing ineffective things to do. Yet in New South Wales, they've been allowed to flourish. I've looked at a few of the schools that feature on the Department of Education website. You have a look at their NAPLAN results and they're down the tube. Inevitably, because this is a proven failed way of doing things, those schools and students suffer with NAPLAN results collapsing. Now, why would the Department of Education and the Minister Stokes and the Premier Berejiklian ever go down this path when there's a whole stack of research you couldn't jump over showing it's the wrong thing to do, the students will fail, and that's what we get.
Kevin, let's talk about teacher training too, because, you know, a long time ago, granted, when I was at school, it's, 3 decades ago, The teachers were people that could have done anything else with their lives, broadly speaking, but had a passion to teach, right? And they were smart. And, you know, you couldn't really put much over them. You felt pretty inspired by what they taught you and their level of knowledge. Nowadays, it's not like that. You fail everything you can possibly fail, and then your last option is to go into teaching, and that's the real shame.
I'd have to disagree to some extent. I mean, my daughter went into teaching, and I was a teacher, my wife was a teacher, my brother was a teacher. I mean, you're right about people going into the profession need to be committed. They need to be able to engage and motivate students. They also need to have a degree of intelligence, but I'd argue that's only one factor. The other point here, and we can't change it, it was some years ago now, Dawkins shut down the schools of education, the colleges of education rather, and he moved everything into the universities. And what happened then is that within the schools of education in the universities, they were more worried, the tutors and the lecturers, about doing their own research, about publishing, about getting higher qualifications. In the colleges, they used to be practising teachers and lecturers, so the teachers who went into that kind of training did an apprenticeship where it was very practical, very down to earth. I mean, now it's very theoretical. I talk to beginning teachers. A lot of them don't know how to teach whole language. They don't know how to teach grammar, spelling, punctuation more formally. They know a lot about Indigenous studies, environmental sustainability. They know a lot about world peace and all these other things, but they're not given that rigorous grounding in the subjects that they're going to teach.
Well, look, I agree with that. You look at the Sky News straps occasionally and you can see that no one knows where an apostrophe should go. But
Peter, can I just say on this, you're not at all. I've been to schools where the principals will say, the less the university teaches the graduates, the better. Because if they're more of an empty vessel and the principal, and these are good schools where they follow the evidence and follow the data, they can pour their model into those new students coming into the school and they can adapt quickly to the things that work. So the less they talk about the rubbish at university on the things that don't work, these principals find they can quickly grab hold of the new graduates, the new teachers, and push them in the right direction with evidence-based programs, particularly direct instruction, teachers being teachers, standing at the front of the classroom and instructing the students on what to do. That's the thing that gets the highest and best result.
I've seen that in Indigenous schools, direct instruction work, and I've seen Indigenous numbers, kids' performance data absolutely go through the roof because they've got a regulated standard of lesson, class by class, across different sort of disciplines. But you know, you can basically fail Year 12 and get into a teacher course.
You can get a 28R.
So
you can fail hopelessly and get in. Well,
but I'd have to interrupt there and say, in fact, that increasingly fewer and fewer students are going straight from Year 12 into teaching. A lot of students do an undergraduate degree first, or else they change from another degree into teaching. And the irony here is that places like Finland, they actually, and Pasi Sahlberg has said this, he's now working in Australia in New South Wales, that a lot of people who go into teaching are average academically. What you have to do is give them a rigorous, sustained 3 or 4 year training so that they don't graduate, go into a school unless they're qualified. And there are
Kevin,
other issues here.
I've got to just go back to that point though. Rather than try and basically polish up lead metal to make it gold, why aren't we aiming for the best and the brightest to go into education? Is there a way we can do something with the HECS to get people to think positively about a university education or a university teacher course by deferring their HECS for them or wiping away their HECS? What can we do? I know people that have gone into teaching, they've lasted 4 or 5 years, but classroom teacher politics, the lunchroom politics of the staff room sent them out the back door. They quit, they walked away from teaching, and they were absolutely the right people we should have had as teaching. Now, it's a state government issue, Mark, and there's more money than ever before. If we can't get this right, we can't get anything right.
Yeah, it's not about resources. You visit the schools and they say, we've got the funds to do the job, and the good schools do it on the basis of evidence. One of the important things in terms of teacher quality that the state government should be doing, they should be saying to the universities, look, these are the things that work, direct instruction in particular, phonics over whole word. We'll only take graduates from universities that teach the right stuff.
Right.
So at least they've got a good start. I mean, the biggest employer of teachers in the country is the New South Wales government. So they've got a lot of leverage over these universities, and they should be dictating to them, this is what works in the classroom. Yeah, absolutely. This is what works in the classroom. This is what we expect your university to school the graduates in, the new teachers, and we'll only take from universities that are teaching the right pedagogy, the right classroom practice. We're not going to be taking from universities that teach rubbish.
How much are parents given a voice in all this, Kevin? I mean, how much are parents actually aware of what goes on in the classroom, and how much are they engaged in what their children are taught?
I mean, that's a difficult one to measure. When you look at the PISA testing and the TIMS as well, there are questions there about parental engagement, community involvement. It's difficult to quantify, but the reality is that the more parents are engaged, I mean, parents are their children's first teachers, and the more they are preparing their kids for school. And this is one of the things we don't want to talk about, the elephant in the room, is that over 30-40% of beginning teachers leave or don't want to go on with it after 3 or 4 years. And one of the biggest problems is are disruptive classrooms, badly behaved students. That doesn't happen in Japan, Finland, South Korea. And parents do have a role to play. Instead of complaining about the teachers or about my kid is the brightest, why aren't you giving him the best attention, parents should actually stand back a bit as well and let the teachers get on with the job.
No, I agree with that. I mean, nowadays if a teacher's upset and raises something about Johnny, the parents are likely to launch into the teacher about Johnny.
Yeah, it depends on the
parent pull Johnny into line.
Depends on the cultural background of the parents. Quite frankly, the Asian work ethic and emphasis on education makes a huge difference. The schools that have got Asian students. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's an example to all of us, and we should be asking why don't all parents take that level of interest and commitment. Homework is good, tutoring is good, drive the kids on. That gets results.
And not every kid gets a prize. Mark, just before we go, I mean, you're in the New South Wales Parliament. This is absolute bread and butter to state governments. Do you get a sense that the New South Wales government here wants this sort of debate? Do you see this occurring around the country, that the states are actually taking responsibility for this data set, or are we just in the blame game?
Well, our Education Minister, Sarah Mitchell, is miles ahead of her predecessors, so that's encouraging. She's got an interest in the evidence. I'm working on a parliamentary report now to drive towards an evidence-based approach. The tragedy is, there are good schools that are doing the right thing. We know what works in the classroom. Why isn't that scaled up?
Yeah.
There's too much freedom for principals and teachers in experimental type schools to be teaching rubbish in the classroom. We've got to put some boundaries around that. Measurement is important, rigour, behaviour, all these standards are critical. And if you're measuring what schools are doing and you have some discipline to actually intervene with schools that are headed in the wrong direction, you start to get better results. So there's 7 or 8 big things that need to be done simultaneously.
I'm going to have to wrap up, Mark. Thank you very much for your time tonight, Mark. Kevin, last word from you.
Yeah, just very quickly, New South Wales will go down the gurgler because, in fact, they've got Jeff Masters reviewing the New South Wales curriculum. If you look at his interim report, it's more of the same. And I'll guarantee in 3 or 4 years, New South Wales will be in significant trouble if they adopt the approach by Jeff Masters.
Yeah, look, I've heard good things about Sarah Mitchell, the New South Wales Education Minister. I might try and get her on here and we'll get into this detail and other things as well. Thanks very much for your time, Dr. Kevin Donnelly and Mr. Mark Latham.